What would you do if you watched your dream turn into a nightmare at 8,000 meters above the death zone? This is not just another mountain tragedy. It's the story of a father and son, bound by blood and passion, who vanished into thin air on one of the most unforgiving mountains on Earth. Welcome to K2 Stories, where we uncover the mysteries of the world's greatest climbs, the triumphs and the tragedies that shake us to our core. In July 2013, Marty Schmidt, a legendary New Zealand climber, and his 25-year-old son Denali stood at the base of K2. To most climbers, even reaching this point is an achievement. But to Marty, the mountain was not just a challenge. It was a calling. Marty had spent decades climbing some of the most dangerous peaks on Earth. He was known as Fearless, a man who laughed in the face of storms, avalanches, and sheer vertical ice walls. For him, the mountain wasn't a place of fear. It was home. Denali, named after the highest peak in North America, had inherited that same fire. He wasn't just a son following his father. He was a partner, a dreamer, and a climber who wanted to carve his own mark in the alpine world. For the first time, the two were climbing K2 together, a father-son team, a bond forged in snow, ice, and trust. But K2, often called the Savage Mountain, is not a place for sentiment. It's a place where the mountain decides who stays and who never comes back. July 2013 was brutal on K2. The weather was unpredictable. Clear skies one moment, violent snowstorms the next. Avalanches rumbled like thunder across the slopes. Many teams at base camp whispered to each other, "This season looks dangerous." Climbers from around the world had gathered. Americans, Spaniards, Italians, Pakistanis, all hoping to be among the few who could say they stood on K2's summit. Out of hundreds who try, only a handful succeed each year, and many never return. Marty and Denali joined forces with other climbers. They pushed supplies up the mountain, setting up Camp 1, Camp 2, and finally reaching Camp 3, perched at 7,300 meters, a place where the air is so thin that every step feels like lifting a mountain. From Camp 3, the summit seemed close, but on K2, close is an illusion. Above them lay the infamous bottleneck, a deadly section of hanging ice cliffs that have claimed countless lives. On July 26th, other teams made a decision: retreat. The weather forecast screamed danger. Snowstorms, avalanches, no clear window for a safe summit. One by one, climbers descended back toward base camp, shaking their heads. Some said, K2 will still be here next year. No summit is worth dying for, but Marty was different. Standing at Camp 3, he looked up at the mountain. His eyes didn't see doom. They saw destiny. He believed the storm would pass. He believed they could push higher, maybe even claim the summit when no one else dared. Denali trusted his father. He had grown up watching Marty conquer mountains that others feared. If his dad said it was possible, maybe it was. But for those watching, it was a chilling sight. One father and son, alone, choosing to stay when every other team turned back. That night at Camp 3, the wind howled like a beast outside their tent. The temperature dropped below 30 degrees Celsius. Inside, Marty and Denali shared a meal of freeze-dried food, their breath visible in the freezing air. Imagine the conversation. A father telling his son, "We can do this." A son answering, "I trust you, Dad." Was it courage? Was it recklessness? Or was it love? The kind of bond that made Denali believe in his father even when the mountain screamed otherwise. The next morning, radio silence. Other teams at base camp tried to contact Marty and Denali, but there was no response. For 2 long days, nothing. No movement on the slopes. No sign of them coming down. Then, on July 29th, Pakistani high-altitude porters were sent to investigate. When they reached Camp 3, the sight froze their blood. The tent was gone. All that remained was torn fabric and snow scattered by an avalanche. Marty and Denali had vanished, swallowed by the mountain. A father and son bound by dreams had disappeared. Some said it was their courage. Others called it madness. But one truth remained: K2 does not forgive. And yet, the mystery didn't end there. Because even after their disappearance, questions haunted the climbing world. Questions that remain unanswered to this day. Were they truly swept away by an avalanche? Did they push higher, beyond Camp 3, chasing the summit? And if they did, how far did they get before the Savage Mountain claimed them? This is just the beginning of their story. 2 climbers, a father and son, a dream swallowed by the Savage Mountain. When news spread that Marty and Denali had vanished on K2, the entire climbing world froze. For some, it was heartbreak. For others, it was a warning. But for everyone, it raised the same question. Why were they the only ones who stayed when all others turned back? At base camp, whispers spread like wildfire. Climbers huddled in their tents, radios buzzing with fragments of communication. They stayed at Camp 3? Alone? Someone muttered. That's madness, another replied. Among seasoned mountaineers, there's an unspoken rule. When the majority retreats, you pay attention. The mountain is speaking. And ignoring it can be fatal. But Marty was not like other climbers. He had built a reputation on bold decisions. On Everest, Cho-Oyu, Denali, and countless Himalayan peaks, he had faced storms and still returned. To many, he was almost indestructible. And perhaps that illusion of invincibility blinded him. On July 29th, after 2 days of silence, high-altitude Pakistani porters climbed toward Camp 3. Every step was heavy, snow burying their boots, the wind clawing at their backs. They carried ropes, oxygen, and a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, Marty and Denali were alive, trapped in their tent, waiting. But when they reached Camp 3, that hope collapsed. The tent site was obliterated. Shredded fabric, broken poles, and avalanche debris scattered across the slope. No bodies, no gear. Nothing but silence. The porters stood there staring at the emptiness. They knew what it meant. On K2, when the mountain erases all trace, survival is impossible. They radioed down, tent destroyed. No sign of climbers. At base camp, the message echoed like a funeral bell. Some climbers wept, others cursed, and some sat in silence, unable to believe that Marty, the man known for surviving everything, was gone. Denali's friends were devastated. He was young, bright, and full of potential. Many believed he could have been one of the great alpinists of his generation. But now, his story ended before it began. For Marty's wife and Denali's mother, the news was unbearable. In one instant, she had lost not only her husband but also her only son, a family wiped away by the savage mountain. But the questions began immediately. Why did Marty and Denali remain at Camp 3 when everyone else descended? Some argued it was arrogance, that Marty believed his experience made him untouchable. Others said it was stubbornness, that he simply refused to walk away when the summit was so close. But there were those who saw it differently. They believed it was courage, that Marty and Denali stayed because they were willing to risk everything for their dream. And maybe because they trusted each other so deeply that fear had no room between them. Over the following weeks, speculation ran wild. Did an avalanche sweep through Camp 3, burying them instantly? Or did they actually climb higher, trying to reach Camp 4, or even the summit, before disaster struck? Some climbers believed they may have pushed toward the bottleneck, the deadliest section of K2, when the seracs above collapsed. If so, their bodies might lie thousands of feet below, hidden forever beneath the ice. But without evidence, no one knew for certain. The savage mountain keeps her secrets. Back home in New Zealand and California, tributes poured in. Fellow climbers described Marty as one of the most passionate mountaineers of his generation. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous outside climbing circles, but he lived more fully than most people ever would. Denali's friends spoke of his kindness, his intelligence, and his adventurous spirit. He was more than just Marty's son. He was his own man, chasing his own horizon. Together they became a symbol of the beauty and the danger of chasing dreams. What struck the world most was the bond they shared. A father and son, tied not just by rope but by trust. In the mountains, trust is everything. You trust your partner with your life. And for Denali, there was no one he trusted more than his father. But that bond, as beautiful as it was, may also have been their downfall. Would Denali have turned back if he wasn't with Marty? Would Marty have been more cautious if his son wasn't beside him? These are the questions that haunt the climbing world. Questions that will never be answered. The mountain had claimed them, but their story didn't end there. Because after their disappearance, debates erupted. Not just about their decisions, but about the very nature of climbing itself. What drives people to risk their lives on peaks like K2? Is it bravery, or is it madness disguised as passion? And perhaps the hardest question of all, when the price of a dream is everything you love, is it still worth paying? The mystery of Marty and Denali doesn't just belong to 2013. It continues to echo today. 2 lives lost, a father and son swallowed by the mountain. But their disappearance in 2013 wasn't just a tragedy. It sparked a storm of debates across the mountaineering world. Because when climbers die on peaks like K2, the question is never just how. The deeper question is always why. For outsiders, the story seemed insane. Why would anyone risk their life climbing a peak where 1 in every 4 climbers dies? To many, it looked like recklessness. But within the climbing community, risk is part of the DNA. Climbers don't speak of safety the way others do. They talk about acceptable risk, tolerance, and commitment. On K2, the danger isn't a possibility, it's a guarantee. The only question is, how much risk are you willing to take for a chance at glory? Marty Schmidt lived by that philosophy. For him, risk wasn't something to avoid. It was something to dance with. He once said in an interview, "Mountains teach us to live fully, because every step could be the last." For Denali, that mindset was inherited. Growing up with a father who breathed mountains, risk was normal. Adventure wasn't a choice, it was a lifestyle. After their disappearance, the climbing world split in two. One side criticized Marty harshly. They argued he should have protected his son, not dragged him into a death trap. Some said, taking your 25-year-old into K2's storm was irresponsible, even selfish. The other side defended him. They pointed out that Denali wasn't a child. He was a skilled climber, fully aware of the risks. To them, Marty and Denali were equals, partners who made a choice together. But the debate revealed a deeper question. Where is the line between courage and recklessness? To understand the tragedy, you must understand K2 itself. Unlike Everest, which has become crowded with commercial expeditions, K2 remains raw, wild, and merciless. Its slopes are steeper, its weather harsher, and its margin for error almost non-existent. K2 has claimed legends before Marty and Denali, and it will claim more after. The mountain doesn't discriminate. Strong, weak, famous, unknown, it takes them all. Some climbers call it a temple, a place where you prove your worth. Others call it a graveyard, but all agree, K2 doesn't care about your dreams. Friends of Marty recalled his laughter at base camp, the way he'd brew tea for others, his booming Kiwi voice that could cut through storms. He was more than just a climber. He was a mentor, a storyteller, a man who made others believe in themselves. Friends of Denali remembered his humility, his kindness, his smile. He was the kind of person who carried joy up the mountain, even when oxygen was scarce. One friend said, "They were two of the happiest people I've ever seen on a mountain." And maybe that's why they stayed. Because for them, being up there wasn't about fear. It was about life. When climbers die on K2, often their bodies remain on the mountain. Retrieval is almost impossible. The cost, the risk, the altitude, it makes recovery unthinkable. For Marty and Denali's family, this was the cruelest part. No funeral, no gravesite, no place to mourn. Just an empty space, a memory frozen in ice. All their loved ones had was a story, and a mountain that became their tomb. The tragedy struck a universal chord because it wasn't just about climbers. It was about family. A father leading his son, a son trusting his father. In many cultures, fathers pass down their craft to their children. But here, the craft wasn't carpentry, farming, or business. It was mountaineering. And the lesson wasn't just how to climb, but how to live fully, even at the edge of death. But the cost of that lesson was final. Their disappearance left people asking hard questions. Should climbing K2 even be attempted? Is the pursuit of adventure worth more than staying alive for family at home? Do mountains reveal human greatness or human foolishness? For every climber who dies, these questions resurface. And yet, year after year, new climbers come, drawn by the same dangerous beauty that took Marty and Denali. As 2013 turned into 2014, the snow covered all traces of Marty and Denali. The savage mountain moved on indifferent, but their story didn't fade. Instead, it began to evolve into legend, because while their bodies were never found, their memory became larger than life. Books were written, documentaries filmed, and climbers, standing at base camp in the years after, would look up at the heights and whisper, "This is where Marty and Denali disappeared." But the legend carries both inspiration and a warning, because the mountain will always ask the same question. What are you willing to give up for your dream? And for Marty and Denali, the answer was everything. 2013 ended with silence. Marty and Denali were gone, swallowed by the savage mountain. But their story didn't stop. It grew. What began as a tragedy became something larger, a symbol. A father and son lost together became part of the myth of K2. And myths, unlike people, never die. Back home in New Zealand, and in the US where Denali had lived, the news shattered hearts. Marty's daughter, Sequoia, lost not just her father, but also her brother. A family split in half in one season. She would later say that the grief was a storm that never passed. Friends and relatives struggled with the absence of closure. There was no coffin, no farewell, just the endless imagination of how those final moments unfolded. Did they fight against the storm until the last second? Did they sit together, father and son, waiting for the snow to bury them? Or did the mountain take them suddenly with one cruel avalanche? No one would ever know, and that mystery became its own kind of torment. But with the pain came something else. The story of Marty and Denali began to ripple outward. Books were written, articles poured in, documentaries featured their journey. Their disappearance was not forgotten, it was immortalized. For climbers, they became a symbol of devotion, to adventure, to each other, to the mountain itself. The father and son bond at the edge of the world became a story repeated at base camps like a prayer. One climber said, "Every time I step onto K2, I think of them, because they remind us that this mountain doesn't just test your body, it tests your soul." In the years after their disappearance, K2 claimed more lives. Storms swept away tents. Avalanches buried climbers alive. The death rate remained brutally high. K2 doesn't change. Humans adapt, bring better gear, stronger ropes, advanced weather forecasts. But the mountain stays the same. Cold, lethal, indifferent. This contrast is part of the obsession. The more it resists, the more climbers feel drawn to conquer it. And yet, as Marty and Denali proved, the mountain doesn't care about conquest. K2 isn't something you beat. It's something that allows you passage, or doesn't. Marty and Denali's story became layered with dual meanings. To some, it was a cautionary tale, proof that chasing glory can lead to ruin, even for the most skilled. A warning that the mountain will always win. To others, it was inspiration, proof that living fully means daring fully, even if the cost is ultimate. For them, Marty and Denali didn't lose. They achieved the purest form of climbing, one where the summit wasn't necessary. The act of being there together was the victory. This duality, warning and inspiration, is what makes their legend endure. In New Zealand, Marty was remembered as a national hero, part of the proud tradition of Kiwi mountaineers. His name now sits alongside legends like Sir Edmund Hillary. In the United States, Denali's story resonated with young adventurers. His life cut short at 25 became a symbol of chasing passion early, of not waiting until someday. And globally, their story reshaped conversations about fatherhood, mentorship, and legacy. Because their bond was more than blood, it was partnership. A partnership sealed in ice. Years later, climbers still reported feeling their presence. Not in a supernatural sense, but in memory, in whispers, in the aura of the place. Some said that when storms howled on the Abruzzi Spur, it felt as if Marty's voice echoed through the wind. Others said they carried Denali's smile with them, as if he still hiked beside them in spirit. K2 has no monuments, no plaques, but in the minds of climbers, the mountain itself became the memorial. Why do humans climb? Why do we throw ourselves against impossible odds knowing the price? The answer isn't simple. For some, it's the summit. For others, it's the journey. For Marty and Denali, it seemed to be both and more. It was about love. Love of mountains, love of adventure, love between father and son. And that love, though it ended in tragedy, left behind a story that will be told as long as people climb K2. The savage mountain stands unchanged. Snow piles high, storms rage, avalanches roar. It will claim more lives and it will inspire more climbers. But for many, when they look at K2, they no longer see just a peak. They see a story carved into its cliffs. A father and son who vanished and yet became eternal. Because death on K2 isn't an ending. It's a transformation. From flesh and bone to myth and memory. And in that transformation, Marty and Denali will forever remain part of the mountain. 10 years have passed since that storm in 2013. The mountain hasn't changed. K2 still stands, brutal and silent, its ridges carved by avalanches, its summit wrapped in clouds. But the world of climbing has changed, shaped in part by the story of Marty and Denali Schmidt. Their disappearance is no longer just an incident in the archives of mountaineering. It is now a parable, told and retold around campfires, in documentaries, and in hushed voices at base camps. A parable about passion, risk, and love. And yet the mystery still lingers. Some climbers swear that they saw faint traces of footprints higher than Camp 3, fading into the snow. Others insist that Marty and Denali reached for the bottleneck, perhaps even pushed beyond it, before the storm swallowed them. There are no photos, no final radio call, just silence. This absence of proof fuels endless speculation. Did they almost reach the summit, becoming in a sense invisible conquerors? Or did the savage mountain claim them before they even had a chance? The mountain never answers. That silence is the answer. But beyond theories and debates, what remains is a deeply human story. Think of Marty, a man who had spent his life chasing summits, training his body to endure what most could not. A man who raised his children to love the outdoors, to feel alive on cliffs and ice. And think of Denali, only 25, with his entire life ahead of him. He could have chosen a safer path, but he chose the mountain, not because of glory, but because it meant being with his father. In the end, maybe that was the real summit, not the top of K2, but the journey side by side. Climbers often say, because it's there. But the truth runs deeper. Humans are wired to seek, to test the edges of existence, to stand where few have stood before. And sometimes, that drive costs everything. Yet if no one dared, the world would be smaller, duller, emptier. The price of pushing limits is high, but so is the reward. Inspiration, legacy, stories that echo long after footsteps vanish in snow. For Sequoia, Marty's daughter, the grief never truly healed, but she carries her father's and brother's memory forward. She speaks of them not with bitterness, but with pride. And for climbers around the world, every rope fixed on the Abruzzi spur, every step toward the bottleneck, carries a whisper of their names. They are gone, but they are not absent. On K2, there are no gravestones, no flowers. The mountain keeps what it takes, but maybe that is the truest memorial of all. Because as long as the savage mountain rises into the sky, Marty and Denali are there, woven into the ice, the storms, the silence. Every climber who looks up at that dark pyramid of rock sees more than a peak. They see a story. They see a father and son who dared. And in that way, Marty and Denali achieved something no summit could give: immortality. So when you hear the name K2, don't think only of danger and death. Think of courage. Think of love. Think of a bond strong enough to face the world's most savage mountain together. This was the story of Marty and Denali Schmidt, lost in 2013 but never forgotten, because legends don't die. They live on in the mountains and in the stories we tell. And if you want more stories like this, true, haunting, unforgettable, make sure you're with us here at K2 Stories. Subscribe, share, and stay close, because the mountains still have secrets to reveal.